Thank you, David. Okay, so I'll talk about anon pop, which is a design we have for, we call it for anonymous post office protocol, essentially anonymous messaging solution. It's work with Nathaniel Galanter, my PhD student, who is in a trip, so he couldn't come here today. Okay, so why anonymity, first of all? Anonymity is arguably important for social reasons. It is definitely interesting. It's a very interesting challenge to provide anonymity, but it is also argued that it's very important for society as a whole to protect individuals, to protect the entire society. Many studies and so on, social scientists claim that this is very important. And of course, there are also drawbacks to anonymity and to strong anonymity, like it's abused by criminals and so on. However, the real bad guys they can use botnets and so on. They don't really need this sort of anonymity solution that we are trying to provide. On the other hand, why do we need to provide new anonymity mechanisms? Everybody is aware of the existence of Tor, the onion routing network. Why do we need something else? Can't we use Tor? So Tor is widely used. It provides low latency anonymous communication. However, there are two reasons that we need additional solutions. The first reason is simply that Tor does not provide very strong anonymity, or to be more precise, Tor's anonymity is very weak. Okay, there are quite a lot of de-anonymization attacks on Tor in different models. I'll talk about that in a moment. And these attacks may be non-trivial, but they are definitely feasible and do not require huge resources like the NSA or anything like that. So that's the number one problem. And the second reason is simply that Tor is providing messaging. It is providing connection anonymity, but does not provide messaging anonymity. And I'll talk about that in a moment also. Okay, so just to elaborate on these two motivations, first of all, the de-anonymization aspect or the weakness of Tor. So Tor project actually state this very clearly in their publication, that like all anonymization solutions which are fast enough to provide low latency, to support surfing and so on, Tor does not provide protection against end-to-end timing attacks. So they state it up front. What may not be so clear is the implication. What does it mean, end-to-end timing attacks? And this is actually a very large range of possible attacks, including an attacker which is an eavesdropper, or certainly a man in the middle to the parties at both ends, so that's an end-to-end timing attacker. Even just a client-side attacker can actually identify what the user is browsing to by using what is called website signatures or fingerprints. And also an off-path attack can do a signaling attack on a suspect server. So if we think that the customer is going to this particular server, we can do sort of a signaling on the server side and detect that the user is indeed confirm that the user is browsing to that illegal or forbidden site. And Tor is also vulnerable to attackers which control entrance and possibly exit Tor nodes. And there are several denial of service attacks on Tor which actually provide the attacker with these sort of capabilities. So there's a whole range of attacks on Tor. There are also attacker may use just a malicious application on the device of the victim without privileges, or just a puppet, some script from a website. In short, Tor is vulnerable to a whole variety of attack models and attackers. And if we want real anonymity, we need to have stronger mechanisms. So that's the first motivation. The second motivation, as I mentioned, is that Tor is protecting connections. And if we're talking about messaging, sending messages, there are additional requirements, because one of the basic requirements for messaging is that messages are available even if your peer is not connected at the same time that you are. And this is just not supported by a connection-based solution. So. And we could also have multiple parties, broadcast, multicast, publish, subscribe, and so on. So we could use, of course, a system like Tor for anonymous messaging to connect to some server, and the server will do the messaging services for us, providing mailboxes for users, and so on. And there are some solutions like that offered, of course. But when we do this, such a solution, we get weak anonymity because it depends both on the server all of the existing solutions completely depend on the server, because Tor has weak anonymity. So if this anonymity server is against the user, then user's anonymity is completely broken. And of course, because of Tor's anonymity, the server does not actually provide complete anonymity for the users. Okay. So what are our goals? The first goal is to have strong anonymity against strong attackers. That's the basic goal. We want to have this anonymity against a strong attacker, which is definitely global eavesdropper. We assume the attacker can eavesdrop on the entire network. In fact, attacker can be a man in the middle in any part of the network. We assume that the clients could be adversarial, and even the servers that we are going to use in the solutions, we assume that the servers, or a lot of the servers, can be adversarial as well. Okay, so first of all, we are trying to protect against a strong attacker. Second is the anonymity properties we are trying to provide are strong anonymity and privacy properties. Essentially, we want communication to be preferably unobservable, so that an observer cannot even know if people are communicating with the system or not. Definitely not if a particular user is communicating or not communicating. And definitely want to provide sender and receiver anonymity. So if a user is communicating, you cannot know with whom he's communicating, either as a sender or as a receiver. So strong anonymity properties. Okay. Finally, we want the system to be usable. Usable and scalable. And that is following the basic principle, which many have said before us and we agree to, which is anonymity loves company. That is, in order to have a good anonymity solutions, you must have many users. Otherwise, essentially, you're already identified by the mere fact of you using an anonymous solution. In particular, in many countries, if you use Tor, then you're already a suspect, right? Because most users do not use Tor. So even if you say, oh, but I use Tor for some legitimate purpose in that country, you know, you have to pick the country, and then you need to know which purpose is legitimate in that country, okay? But even if you say so, then you're still a suspect because, oh, well, we don't know, but so few people use Tor that you are already a suspect, okay? So and that's for Tor, which have really done, you know, a lot of effort to be widely used and so on. So it's definitely an important goal and a huge challenge to have a solution which will be sufficiently usable, scalable, low overhead in order for it to have a chance of being widely deployed. Okay, so that's our goal. What do we do for that? First of all, to have acceptable, reasonable, low overhead. And the overhead for the user is, first of all, in the term of latency. And in particular, since we are providing a messaging service and not a browsing service, then some latency is acceptable. How much? Well, I guess this is a timing problem because, you know, if you were talking about this 15 years ago, maybe even just 10 years ago, people say, you know, give me an hour, that will be fine for my messages. But today, people say, wow, more than 5 seconds is unacceptable, right? So this is indeed a problem. When we are talking right now about the range of, you know, minutes in order to provide high, strong anonymity, which, you know, may not be acceptable for all users, but that's what we are shooting for right now. But also in terms of bandwidth, in terms of CPU usage, the overhead has to be low and is low in our design. Clearly, it is critical to support mobile devices and mobile clients. And there are two main challenges in supporting mobile clients for an anonymity solutions. The first is disconnections. Because users can become disconnected, when the user is disconnected, clearly users cannot communicate. So since we want to provide strong anonymity, unobservability, so that you don't even know if user communicating or not, but that requires some sort of use of cover traffic, but if the user is disconnected, user cannot send cover traffic. So that's a huge challenge, and we'll see later on how we are trying to meet that challenge. The other problem is energy. So we have done a lot of effort to make our system be an energy efficient, and I will not get into all of the energy details, but I'll talk a bit about the results. The results are very positive in the energy side. I will not discuss more about this aspect, but it's an important aspect: incentives and defenses. Incentive for the providers of the system. If the system is completely anonymous, why should anybody actually contribute the server resources necessary to run such a system? So, well, there could be motivation of some non-profit organizations which are, pro civil liberty and so on, and they have a motivation for that. But we also want to support commercial motivations For that, we need to have some commercial incentives. And on the other hand, we need to protect the users against spamming. So all of that is also stuff we have in the system. I will not actually be able today to discuss these aspects. And finally, in order to have, again, a usable system for many, many users, it must be heterogeneous, support different devices, different rates, different trust anchors. One user trusts that server, another user trusts in different servers. So it must be a very open and interoperable system. Okay. And here is the basic design. So the basic design, as you can see, is comprises of three basic kinds of servers: mixes, a push mix, a pull mix, and a post office. Post office is kind of the heart of the system, so that's why it's called the anonymous post office protocol. Okay. Okay. So the mixes are mixing the message from all the clients. The push mix is mixing the messages as they are sent to the post office. And the pull mixes are mixing the messages as clients are pulling them from the post office to read their own messages. Okay? And therefore, both of these mixtures are hiding the relation between a particular post box in the post office and the sender and the recipient. Okay? This is the goal. And in order, we use standard techniques like using fixed size the encrypted messages, of course, to hide the content. All the traffic is synchronized between the clients and the mixes, between the mixes and the post offices, any two entities. And if we need to, we do padding, either of a particular message or of entire messages. Okay, so that's one component. Then we have the post office itself. We do not have to be just one server, but for simplicity, let's talk about one server. And this is keeping these anonymous mailboxes of anonymized users, keeping the information and giving this information to users when they are pulling them. And we want to have security also against a corrupt post office. So although the post office is kind of in the center of this network, security should be also against the corrupt post offices. And this is provided, well, if the users are connected, just by having this fixed rate of communication through the mixes, then the post office cannot actually identify which of the users using which of the mailboxes, because all the users are communicating in fixed rate, and there is no relation between the particular user and the Mac and a mailbox. So as long as the mixes are fine, a bad post office cannot do anything. The problem, of course, becomes when either we have problems with the mixes, so some mixes are also corrupt together with the post office, or when users get disconnected. And we'll talk about some of the defense mechanisms against these more advanced scenarios later on. There could be multiple post offices. They could be competing on prices, on security, on trust, and so on. And we can have very flexible mailbox policies supporting broadcast, multicast, publish, subscribe, and so on. And the same user could also keep many different mailboxes at the same time. So let's talk about some of the security properties, and we'll begin with the basic properties. So as you can see here, this first property is talking about the case where the post office is secure. And since the clients are sending in fixed rate, actually it doesn't matter if all the other clients are malicious and if all the mixes are malicious. As long as you are sending to if the post office is okay, then of course your entire security anonymity is guaranteed. Now that's not very surprising, right? Because we've been just sending at fixed rate to the post office. Doesn't matter what you do. Communication is flowing at fixed rate to the post office. Post office is keeping the mailboxes. Communication is being pulled out of the post office at fixed rate. So we have perfect anonymity. But again, that is because in this simple scenario, we have an absolutely secure post office. So we'll get back to the more interesting scenarios soon. Okay. What happens if the post office is malicious? Now, this depends on the mixes. As long as the mixes are okay, then we still have sender or recipient anonymity. In particular, if the push mix is not corrupted, although the post office is corrupted, we cannot know which of the clients which are sending, client 1 and client N here, for instance, has been sending to a particular mailbox, because both of them are sending and with fixed rate. Again, the kind of problem we need to confront is when the users do get disconnected, and then, yes, then maybe we can identify when the user is not sending to some mailbox and so on. Okay. Okay, and similarly, if the pool mix is not corrupted, then we get receiver anonymity. We cannot know which mailbox belongs to which user, which mailbox is being pulled by which user. Okay, so these are like the basic properties which hold when we have this either a non-corrupt post office or some of the mixes being non-corrupted. That's what we get. Okay. Let's go now to the more difficult cases and begin with the issue of disconnected users. And first of all, let me explain why this basic solution may not provide sufficient protection when users may be disconnected. So first of all, remember that now we are talking about a corrupt post office. Okay. So the corrupt post office, of course, knows when a specific mailbox is being checked, when the user is picking. Some user is picking his mail from some mailbox. So that's visible, right? He knows he gets a request for a particular mailbox. And so has this timeline, and every time period you can see when a particular mailbox was checked. Okay? And the post office wants to know which was the user. Now, if users are disconnecting, supposing that the post office can also know by being a global eavesdropper, you can know when each user is disconnected from the network. Okay, so here are just 4 users, and we signal X when this user is disconnected. Obviously, if the user is disconnected at some time, therefore the mailbox could not be checked by that user. In fact, this is an example. So the mailbox was checked in time 3, but user Cody was disconnected, so it couldn't be that the mailbox belongs to Cody. Okay, so using this simple logic, we can actually identify the user. Okay, so in particular, since at time 4 the mailbox was checked, both Cody and Bob cannot be the owners, and similarly we see that Dan cannot be the owner because at time 8 the mailbox is checked. So we also rule out Dan, which leaves only Abe. So Abe is the owner of this mailbox. Voila, we've identified the user. Okay. So when users can get disconnected, we may be able to identify the user. Okay. And that's what we would like to improve. Okay. And this is essentially the intersection attack. And the question is, how feasible is this attack? Because, okay, I've shown this attack when we have 4 users, but is this feasible when there are many, many users? Maybe if there are enough users, this attack becomes not feasible. And how to make the attack harder or infeasible. Okay. And our solution to that, essentially, is what we call privacy-enhanced mailboxes, which are mailboxes which can be shared by multiple users. So a group of users is using the same mailbox, sending and receiving from the same mailbox, and we also change the mailbox. Each user may change the mailboxes that it is using periodically, every some epoch, some time. And this will make it much harder to correlate the event between events in a particular mailbox and events for a particular user. Okay, so if we look again at the time, now we have a mailbox which is shared among multiple users. Same kind of scenario. The post office can see how many read attempts it gets for the mailbox in each period, and it could try to correlate it to which user is available, but it becomes much harder. Okay, so I will not go over the example, but that's a sort of analysis you can do, and obviously it becomes much harder. Also, the analysis shows now it becomes much harder to map the users of a mailbox. Okay, how do we do this kind of privacy-enhanced mailboxes, which will be shared among multiple users and not allow the post office to know which user is picking the mailbox? The trivial way will be to say, okay, every user is picking all the messages from the mailbox. So we have a mailbox shared among users. Everybody is reading all of the messages. All of them are encrypted, and that's one way to do it. Can we do a more efficient solution? And I'll talk about 2 kind of variants. The basic mechanism is what we call a round token privacy-enhanced mailbox, where in order to send the message to a mailbox or to retrieve the message from the mailbox, I have some sort of a token, a one-time token. And this will expose to the post office how many times each message was picked from the mailbox, but we still hide who has picked them and who has sent each message. Okay. How do we do this? How do we have this kind of one-time numbers for the messages for each mailbox? So the users using a mailbox have some key, K. Okay, and we begin by thinking about a symmetric solution. So all the users using a particular mailbox are using the same key, K. And at each round to send to the user, we use the token, which is pseudo-random function with this key of the user and the round. So we now have a one-time number for each. The identifiers that we are going to use, the mailbox we are going to use, is actually changing every round, at every round, and for each user. And X, since the recipient X knows what is this token at each particular round, then the user can actually also draw the messages out of the mailbox by using this simple pseudo-random function. Only drawback here is that the peers are also able now to pull messages out of the mailbox. So messages may be encrypted, you don't know the content, but every peer is now able to know if messages were received or not. That may be some exposure for such a solution if it is a mailbox intended for a single recipient. For a broadcast mailbox, if it's a group of people which all want to receive all the mailbox, then it's fine. But in the more common case, where it's a mailbox of a particular recipient, we don't want the senders to be able to, to also know how many messages were received in a particular round. Okay, so that's a problem. So therefore, that's the next thing. We'll slightly extend this solution to prevent the peers from pulling messages. So to have a solution which is a bit asymmetric, where every peer can send us a message at every round, but only the owner can pull the messages out of the mailbox. How do we do that to prevent peers from pulling messages? So like before, we use this one-time token to identify the mailbox. So you compute the same kind of T value, pseudo-random value as before, but the token will not be really T, but will take some public key of the recipient, G to the S, which all the senders will have, and we raise it to the power of T. So now we get another pseudo-random value, but the value S is a secret which is known only to the owner of the mailbox. And by proving now, so we got the number of the mailbox is G to the ST. The owner can know this value ST, and it can prove this efficiently using non-interactive zero-knowledge proof. It can prove this to the post office. And by proving this to the post office, it shows, okay, I'm allowed to draw the mail out of this mailbox, and therefore he can receive the mail, and other users can only send mail but not receive the mail. Okay. So this is, and we have, it's a standard efficient implementation of non-interactive zero-knowledge proof. So we now have also this property where we have this kind of asymmetric mailbox where everybody can send me mail, but only I can withdraw mail from the mailbox. Okay. Does this actually protect us against this sort of intersection attacks where we are using the fact that we know that when users are disconnected? Well, when we look at the similar mailboxes and we calculate by this kind of attack we've discussed before, extended to analysis to identify how many slots does it take to identify who are the senders and who are the recipients, we see we have the line here for identifying the pull mailbox, so who is pulling from the mailbox, and this green and red line for identifying the friends or the entities which are pushing to the mailbox, which is actually both of them are together. So we see that in any case the numbers are not very high, but we see here the number of slots required to in the y-axis the number of slots required, and in the x-axis we see the number of users. So we see that as we have more and more users in the system, indeed anonymity improves. It takes more rounds, But the number of rounds is not that high. So we're talking about maybe 2,000 rounds or up to 5,000 rounds. Numbers are not very high. However, when we also add these privacy-enhanced mailboxes, then the numbers dramatically improve, and we get that with the same number of users, let's say 1,000 users, we get that we can talk about 10,000 users or even more. Okay, so this can significantly improve our resistance to this sort of intersection attack. Okay, so we did get a lot of mileage from this. Okay, oops, I went wrong way. Okay. So this is really protecting us against attacks by the post office. However, that was attacks against the post office using information about connectivity of users, so eavesdropping ability. Now let's consider a post office which also controls mixes. What can we do in that case? So we do have some defenses even in that case. In particular, we can use not just one mix, but a cascade of mix. And the system does support a cascade of mix, of course, using onion encryption, the pretty standard way. We can also have mechanisms to prevent or detect tagging attacks, either by the post office itself or by the first mix in case of cooperation between the post office and the first mix. First mix is important because the first mix knows who is the user. So that's why it's important to protect against the first mix. And again, we have a mechanism to protect against this, either to prevent it entirely or to detect such an attack, an attempt of such an attack, and then we will just not use that particular mix. And another defense mechanism is to use multiple post offices, either users selecting different post offices, selecting some of the mailboxes may be at different post offices, and so on. So that will also provide additional protection against this sort of attack. Okay. Just a few words about the energy consumption of the system. So that's of course very, very critical. So we've compared symmetric and asymmetric versions of the cryptography of the onion encryptions that we use. We've measured, it's not so easy to measure actually correctly the energy of resources required by such an application in mobile devices. We mostly use the Qualcomm Trap-and profiler, which is relatively a bit more precise. But that also comes with limitations, never mind. So these are, and these are the results that you can see. The differences between the asymmetric and symmetric version are not that huge, actually. And we also tested this with users. So we actually did an experiment with users, giving them the application on their mobile devices and running it for several weeks and seeing in each week if the user is able to detect if it's running with the application or without the application. So it was a double-blinded experiment, and the results, without giving all the, essentially users did not know. The results were almost perfect. That users had no clue if the system was running or not running. They did not have any real feeling for the overhead of the system. Okay, so of course there is some overhead of the system, but it was lower than any ability of users to actually notice it. Okay, yeah. So to conclude, we believe that strong anonymity against strong attackers is feasible. And you are welcome to try the prototype of the application. It's available in this URL over here. Of course, there is much more work, more work which we've done, but I didn't cover because I did it quickly. And also more work which we are working on to improve the analysis and defenses for disconnecting users, to analyze and to improve the performance and the queuing of the system, to work on post office accountability, prevent, for instance, the post office from dropping messages, just not delivering a message. And we can detect this sort of thing and then know that a post office is not behaving correctly. And of course, we have a lot of work to continue to improve the implementation to make it into a real system. It is, the demo is available, you can kind of play with it and so on, but to make it into a real system, fine-tuning, comparing performance in different implementation options. Open source, having completely seriously quality open source implementation with scalable servers and with client library including APIs, which will allow multiple messaging clients to integrate with our system. We already are in discussion with one secure messaging for mobile devices application, which want to integrate with our API, so they can also offer anonymity. Okay. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you.